On the decks of the American carriers USS Enterprise and USS Yorktown, a new kind of battle was being waged. Sailors moved with a cautious, exhausted urgency. They were tending to the wounded, their quiet murmurs a stark contrast to the roar of battle just hours before. They worked to secure damaged equipment, patching holes and clearing away wreckage, preparing for any lingering threat that might emerge from the twilight. The furious adrenaline that had fueled them through the desperate fight began to ebb, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and the quiet, heavy weight of reflection. Standing near the bow of the Enterprise, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey held his binoculars to his eyes, his knuckles white. He scanned the vast, darkening expanse of the Pacific, searching for any sign of the enemy. His uniform was scorched, his hands stained with grease and soot from helping with emergency repairs. He was a picture of the battle itself, battered but unbroken. Looking out at the scattered fires on the horizon, which marked the graves of Japanese carriers, a sense of profound awe settled over him. The Imperial Japanese Navy, a force that had seemed utterly invincible, that had swept across the Pacific with terrifying speed, had been crippled, decimated in a matter of hours. He allowed himself a brief, hard-won moment of satisfaction, a feeling immediately tempered by the sobering thought of the friends and comrades who had not survived the chaos. Meanwhile, on the heavily damaged but still floating USS Yorktown, Ensign George Gay leaned against the fuselage of his fighter plane. He had stared death in the face earlier that day, surviving a harrowing torpedo attack that had sent his own plane into the sea. He had watched the battle unfold from the water, a lone spectator to history. Now back on a friendly deck, his clothes were still soaked with salt water, his face streaked with grime. With every breath, he tasted the lingering smoke and the salt of the ocean. Around him the crew spoke in hushed tones, a mix of disbelief and overwhelming relief. They had faced the best pilots and the most powerful carriers Japan had to offer, and they had lived to tell the tale. Gay's thoughts, however, drifted to the friends he had lost in the fiery maelstrom, the empty seats in the ready room. The thin razor's-edge margin between victory and annihilation pressed heavily on his shoulders. This victory had been bought with blood. Far from the immediate chaos, the psychological shockwave of the battle was already crashing down on the Japanese command. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the brilliant architect of the Pearl Harbor attack and the Midway operation, now faced the ruin of his meticulously laid plans. He had sailed with the most powerful naval force ever assembled, confident in a victory that would crush the American spirit. Instead, his fleet was shattered. The loss of 4 of his best carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, was a catastrophe from which the Imperial Japanese Navy would never fully recover. These ships weren't just steel and machinery. They were the very heart of Japan's offensive power, carrying with them the most experienced and skilled naval aviators in the world. In one single disastrous day, that corps was gone. For the first time since the war began, the seemingly unstoppable momentum of the Japanese Empire had not just been halted, it had been reversed. The Americans had proven something vital, that superior intelligence, audacious courage, and near-perfect timing could overcome a numerically superior and more experienced foe. Back on Midway's shores, amidst the wreckage of the island's defenses, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, convened with his staff. He had orchestrated this victory from his headquarters at Pearl Harbor, thousands of miles away, in a gamble that rested on the skill of his codebreakers and the courage of his men. His voice was calm and deliberate as he reviewed the after-action reports and the heartbreaking casualty lists. He acknowledged the incredible heroism of the pilots and sailors who had, against all odds, turned the tide. On the maps spread across the table, old lines were erased, and new ones were drawn. Strategies were revised. The next steps in the long, arduous Pacific campaign were being planned. But even in this moment of stunning triumph, Nimitz understood the brutal reality. The war was far from over. This day had revealed the incredible potential of American forces, but the Pacific Ocean remained a vast, deadly, and unforgiving battlefield. Across the damaged decks and smoldering hulks, individual stories of heroism were already becoming legends. Pilots like Lieutenant Commander Dick Best, who displayed incredible skill and nerve by leading the decisive dive-bombing attacks that sealed the fate of the Japanese carriers, were being hailed as heroes. Yet men like Bess knew the truth. This victory wasn't the work of one man or one squadron. It was built on the collective courage of thousands, from the gunners who filled the sky with anti-aircraft fire, to the sailors in the engine rooms who kept the ships moving through hell, to the cryptanalysts in a windowless basement in Hawaii, who had unlocked Japan's most secret codes. It was the synergy of intelligence, skill, and sheer raw bravery that had made the impossible possible. The American pilots had been outmatched in experience, their torpedo planes tragically obsolete, but they flew into the teeth of the enemy defenses anyway, pressing their attacks with a suicidal determination that ultimately created the opening for the dive bombers to strike. As night finally fell over Midway, the sea grew quiet, returning to an eerie calm that mirrored the star-dusted sky above. The only light came from the distant, angry glow of burning ships, funeral pyres that cast a somber, haunting beauty over the scene of destruction. In the quiet darkness, men stood at the rails of their ships, lost in thought. They were processing what had just happened, trying to comprehend the scale of it all. They were beginning to realize that the Battle of Midway was more than just a clash of steel and fire. It was a defining moment, a fulcrum upon which the entire war in the Pacific pivoted. It was a testament to strategy, a monument to sacrifice, and an enduring story of the unbreakable human spirit when placed under the most intense fire imaginable. By the end of that fateful day, June 4, 1942, the United States Navy had secured a victory so decisive, so complete, that its echo would ring throughout history. The core of the battle had lasted only a few short, frantic hours, yet its consequences would reshape the remainder of the Second World War. It proved that even in the darkest of times, when facing what seems like an invincible enemy, a combination of preparation, determination, and unwavering courage can defy all expectations and fundamentally change the course of history. The tide had turned, and the long, hard road to Tokyo had just begun. After the deafening roar of battle, a somber quiet settled over the waters of Midway. For the surviving American sailors, the work was far from over. They toiled relentlessly, their hands blistered, their bodies aching with exhaustion, patching up the wounds on their ships and recovering what they could from the debris-strewn sea. The Pacific was a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered dreams, a stark reminder of the battle's ferocity. Yet, amidst the grief for fallen comrades, a powerful sense of purpose burned bright. They had not just survived. They had been part of a moment that would echo through history. Back at his command post in Pearl Harbor, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz absorbed the reports. The full scale of the victory was almost unbelievable. It wasn't just a military triumph. It was a testament to American resilience. The brilliant work of codebreakers, who had unlocked Japan's most secret plans, had been the first critical piece. But it was the daring tactical gambles and the raw courage of every pilot and sailor that brought it all together. Nimitz saw it clearly. This synergy of intelligence, audacity, and bravery had just redrawn the map of the war. These were the lessons that would now guide every future operation, from the Solomon Islands to the shores of Japan itself. On the other side of the Pacific, the Imperial Japanese Navy was reeling. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, now faced a disaster of his own making. 4 of his finest aircraft carriers, the very heart of his fleet, were gone. Hundreds of his most elite and experienced pilots, men who could not be replaced, now lay at the bottom of the ocean. The aura of invincibility that had surrounded the Japanese war machine was shattered. The myth was broken. For the Allies, fighting desperate battles across the globe, the news of Midway was a jolt of pure adrenaline. Hope, which had been in such short supply, was now surging. Aboard the USS Enterprise, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey stood on the flight deck, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. He looked out at the tranquil sea, a stark contrast to the chaos of the preceding days. His mind replayed the critical moments, the desperate search for the enemy.